We're very excited today to be here with Miss Majora Carter. And just so you know, I'm going to just say some of these amazing accomplishments, which include that she's a MacArthur Genius Fellowship, a Peabody Award in Broadcasting. She has top honors in urban design, a tech social enterprise, 7 honorary PhDs, and a brilliant array of Google and Yelp reviews, plus a New York City Alfresco City Award for her hip hop cafe, the Boogie Down Grind, which I was so fortunate to actually be able to see about a year ago. And I just wanted to say before starting that we're here today because you have good neighbors, which are the Kents, which you may know, who are leaders in the placemaking movement. And Ethan noticed right away and reached out to us, and he said, "Oh my gosh, Majora just put out a book." And he said, "Did you know about that?" And I said, "No, we did not know." And so he said, "Well, you just saw her not very long ago there at her cafe, so why don't you ask her to come?" And so of course we got a hold of you, and both you and James said, "Okay, we'll come on, but you have to buy 10 books." So I just wanted to let everybody here today know that actually of those 10 books, we have 5 left. And those 5 books are going to be given away to different placemakers. But what you have to do in order to get the books is you need to write in to Ryan, and he's going to put he's right over here, Ryan Smoller, who's a leader in the Placemaking US. He's going to put a link in there, and you have to write why and how come you are interested in reclaiming your community. So that is going to be what we do today. And I just want to say thank you so much. I'm very honored to have you here today. And I was very moved by your text, and welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to see you again.
You too.
And I'm really glad we got to see each other in the before times, so that's kind of, well, it wasn't exactly the before times, but, we took a risk and we're going to see each other. So it was lovely.
Yes. And I want to let you know today that we also got a message yesterday, which was because the global network of placemakers is also with us. And so there's a group of people from Oslo in Norway, and they wrote, "I've had a major placemaker crush on Majora since I first saw her on the TED Talk in 2007. And we're gathering a group of people involved in social aspects of cities here in Oslo to watch the presentation together and hopefully to join in the discussion." Wow. So we have a group here today from Oslo.
Well, hello, because I was literally just on another call before this, and I was talking about my trip to Oslo a few years ago. So, hi, love your country. City.
Majora, I just finished your book 2 days ago. And I want to say I cried in every single chapter. There was something poignant that stuck out, and I was very moved, and I was very moved by feeling that I was going through a struggle with you the whole way. And I just wanted to start out with one of the things that you said is in one of the chapters, you asked the question, "So what is the problem?" And from the text, I gathered there's a series of things that you put out. And the last one for me is one that it's not really talked about, but it is talked about all the time through the text. But the first one was poverty being equated with culture, the nonprofit industrial complex, brain drain, resistance on all sides, which is your fan club or the haters, and then also this heartbreaking thing, which for me is the thing that's talked about throughout, but I feel like it's something that it's about dehumanization. And so I was hoping today kind of to just go through and unpack those with you a little bit, and then give some time for folks who obviously have a lot of questions for you to share those questions. So if that is okay with you, it'd be
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay. All right, so can we start with poverty being equated with culture?
Yeah. I mean, when you think about, especially in the communities that I feel most connected to and wanting to support, in part because I am from one. We call them low status communities, again, not because of the the status of the people, like there's something wrong with them, but inequality is absolutely assumed in those communities by both people from inside the community, which is why so many of us are led to believe that we need to grow up and get away from the community if we're going to make anything of ourselves, but also the way that we're treated, by the nonprofit and the government industrial complexes. It's like we're problems to be solved, but never really will be solved because, in particular, because of so much of the poverty, which is often considered a part of our DNA. And that's why if it's a part of your DNA, if it's a part of your culture, then that's where you're stuck. And, I challenge that, but I've seen it so often. And if you have experienced it so often, it was just like, and it goes all over the place, whether it's in, inner cities or Native American reservations, or even, former Rust in the States, the kind of, towns that were all white. You had a lot of manufacturing in it. And then the industry left, and it left those places like really devoid of a lot of economic development and hope and pride.
Yeah.
And so, and those places became the places that people literally measure success by how far they can get away from them. But billions and billions of dollars in philanthropic as well as government money is spent in those, but people don't get any better. Like their conditions don't get any better. And there's always an enduring cycle of folks that are going through that same thing that these billions of dollars are meant to address, but they don't. And that's what was really difficult for me and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book, because, I knew that there was so much talent, within our communities, but it's not, it's born and raised there, nurtured there, supported, but it's expected that they leave. And I was like, what would happen if we stayed?
Right.
And especially, yeah, and used our first fruits, to support our own communities.
I noticed that you talked about you had a really poignant question where you said, what would we be reclaiming and from whom? And you talk about this story of the houses burning and the location being on fire, and even this really amazing moment where you said you were embarrassed as a child because it was the world was watching, and there was a commercial, or it was on was it the Super Bowl
Oh
Sunday,
no, it was the World Series. Yeah.
the World
And
Series.
it was the 1977 World Series. And I don't know if they still do this. I don't really watch it anymore, but they had the big aerial cameras would go up above the stadium, and then in the distance there were, not even that far in the distance, it was just like 3 separate fires burning, like big fires outside of the stadium. And it was horrible, to see that and to know it wasn't in my neighborhood, but the South Bronx it's a pretty big area. But to know that it's the World Series, and everybody, it certainly in our country, it seemed like they were watching it, and they were looking at the neighborhood and just being like, what kind of like animals live in a place like that where it's just like burning around them and they're still there. I mean, it's just, I think I used the phrase, I felt like I'd vomited inside my own body. Like that's how, as a little kid, that's what I remember, feeling like I don't want to be seen and I don't want anybody to know where this is coming from. And that kind of added, that belief stayed with me for a long time.
I what I noticed from this, and I just something that I got the sense of, is that there is this internalized oppression that also builds, and it starts with those first images of seeing what you described.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
I just thought it was very interesting that along with all of the external factors, there's also this, and I felt like that sort of built towards that thing where people are pulling back down when you're about to liberate yourself from a situation. And I just wanted to know a little bit more about like how that buildup happens in these communities that you call low status communities.
But wait, are you referring to like the pull to leave or?
No, before even the pull to leave, the internalized oppression that's coming from everything in the environment around a person that actually makes them feel that they can't leave.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that's, I think in this country, especially where I think poverty in and of itself is considered, a crime. Like it's something that, that since it's considered, a cultural attribute, it's clearly something that those people, they didn't work hard enough. They don't care about their children enough. They don't do X, Y, Z. If they had just done that, then their lives would be better. And so, yeah, after a while, since, poverty is thought of, as a, not a state of, wherein there are conditions that are created. Yeah, exactly. Poverty is seen as a character flaw that's ingrained in some people, unless they're, able enough to get out in some way, the special ones. But even those, have internalized like this idea. Like I know for, since I was one of the smart ones, there was a whole system that was, both inside and outside the community that was just like, okay, we can get that one out. But, we know where she's from. And we're never going to let her forget that. We just didn't, whether it was like, teachers in high school or guidance counselors or, folks that I met along the way. It's just like, that's what we do. It's just like, this is what you do to poor people. As if like the whole, like, we love the idea of that Cinderella story so much that we're willing, to dismiss and I think even to humanize, people, who happen to have been, born into like the kind of, regulations and history, where no matter what they do, things are going to be different. I don't have the numbers, but, I read about the, like the issues of reparations, in this country, which are obviously highly charged. And, so that even if there are definitely some who believe that it's just like, white people handing over their checkbooks to people of color, in particular Black ones. And, and even if they did, considering, that's been 400 years, since all these policies, have been, and not just for Black people, it's like there was something called the Chinese American worker tax, where like 50%, Chinese workers' wages in the 1800s just had to go to the state. Just like, didn't matter who they were. That basically you'd never be able to repay, what was lost, for those folks. So that's not what anybody's looking for. Even we can even hope for, because it just doesn't, there is no such, and I would feel like there's probably no such number that big, but it is the kind of, expectation that people's, ideas of their own self-worth, can be repaired. And that's really what reparations, and it means, I guess it comes from the, the old French word, to make new again. And so much of that is I think just, culturally, like, what do I need to feel like, a healthy, human being, one that is treated with respect and that is viewed that way. And it's not always about money. It's just not.
Thank you. Okay, so another question that I have is, you use the term poverty level economic maintenance, and you use it also, it seems, to describe the kind of community development that is de facto being done in communities. So one of the things that you said that to look at the infrastructure of low status communities, what you find oftentimes is no banks or credit unions, rather check cashing places and pawn shops, no stores, cafes, restaurants, or farmers markets, but instead gas stations, liquor stores, fast food restaurants, no third spaces for community commons, no wellness and healthy lifestyle opportunities. You have pharmacies, health clinics, self-medicating drugs, no vibrant mix of retail, and no different levels of housing, only a concentration of affordable housing and low income housing, homeless shelters, government subsidized housing. And I just wanted to like, we see a lot of communities right now that are dealing with this like post-industrial
Mhm.
Spaces that have become exactly what you described.
Right.
And
There
I
is
just
an
want to
art.
know, do you
Yeah.
think that through the method that you're describing of reclaiming your community, some of these issues that we're seeing all over the countries can be effectively changed, and how?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, you have to acknowledge that that is the architecture, within the low status communities. I mean, it may change a little bit depending if it's a rural area or it's a suburban or if it's an urban one, but ultimately you know it when you see it, like you know which side of the tracks you're on. And more importantly, everybody who's from those communities knows what side of the tracks they're on. Because again, inequality is assumed in those communities, both from people both inside and outside of those neighborhoods. And so, but it does take, a little bit, and I got my, for me, it was the fact that here I did, I was able to flee the South Bronx, use education to do so. Again, I was a little kid when I was told you're really smart, you're going to get out of here. And to me, that was like the best thing in the world. It's like, you can't like watch like half of your neighborhood literally burn down, you know, and not have it affect you. It's like, especially as a child, and especially when adults are telling you, it's like, you're going to grow up and get out of here. Good. Like you're going to make it out for maybe we don't. And then nobody ever, well, actually, some people actually did say, it's like, okay, we don't have a chance, but you do. So get out, because they didn't feel as though there was anything in those communities that could support them. And that like sort of, I mean, I feel like every time I say that, like a little part of me just dies, because it's people feeling like they don't see the value, like they really internalize that. And so for on a certain level, I am so grateful that I did have a chance to get out. I went away to school. I honestly would not have come back home, but I am so grateful to God that, that they had other plans for me. And it was just like, you're going to go home, honey. And, you're going to see. And it was because I had that education and some distance that it was so clear that the reason why our communities were being treated the way that they were legislatively, through regulations, through economic developments that absolutely favored people that were doing quite well, because of our misery, whether it was the real estate developers, getting huge developer fees for building really crappy housing, um, or, the pharmaceutical industries, who actually, I'm sure a big part of their balance sheet, are the lifestyle conditions, that are prevalent in low status communities. They're not getting better, they're just treating the symptoms. And but again, having that distance was exactly what I needed to know. It's like, oh my gosh, it's because we're poor and of color that all we're seeing as is a meal ticket for somebody else.
In
And
in
that's
your
what,
text, you also describe how the nonprofit industrial complex is very much tied into this problem. And can you explain a little bit more about that?
yeah, I mean, it's just, the billions of dollars, that go into these communities. It's billions. I mean, I don't think I wrote about it in the book, but there was this a brilliant study that was done. I think it was Columbia University, and there was spatial analysis or something like that. But they did this, it was an art project actually, and they did this thing called $1 million blocks. And they looked at a block in Manhattan, which is one of the wealthiest parts of New York City, and just looked at the per capita wealth for that one block. And then they went to another block, in a very low status, part of Brooklyn, not gentrified at all. And guess what? The same amount of money was represented in those blocks, but it was because of the number of people that were involved, or their families that were involved in the justice system, that were literally in jail. Or, there was lots of health issues that were very expensive to take care of. And so same amount of money, quality of life, really, really different. And I was just like, oh my God, it was one of the most galling things. And then when you realize like so much money is spent, and it just keeps getting spent the same exact way. And everybody loves that Albert Einstein quote. It's just like, the insanity is when you keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. And it's just like the nonprofit industrial complex does the same thing over and over and over again. It does not invest, in the people in those communities as if they have the capacity to be the keys to their own recovery. They don't. They don't look at the people that are in those communities, or they look at the people in the communities, like the talented ones, as the ones they need to save and get out, so that the people that are left behind don't even have that kind of example for what's possible. Like, that's a real easy way to break people. If was what they don't know, they don't know. If they don't see it, they won't know. One of the things that, and I definitely talked about this in my book, like, you really want to hurt me? Then somebody from my own neighborhood asked me, so where do you live now? Because to them, I'm a successful person. And they're like, success doesn't live here. So where do you live? Like, around the corner, like from my cafe and from, a bunch of other projects.
Yeah, you said
I'm
that
a
there was
citizen of the world. So yeah, I moved, but I'm not going anywhere.
you shared there's a kind of learned helplessness that occurs because of this kind of a structure that's built through the nonprofit industrial complex.
Yes, it's expected. And when you step out of that, like, role that has been that role that's been literally you've been cast in, then it's kind of like, that's not an authentic, representation of this community. I was like, diversity is a beautiful thing. Why would we not have, vary it? Why is it just there's only one authentic representation, within our community, and it's someone who's struggling and who needs, your help? Maybe I can help you.
So there's this pivot that you kind of share where originally you are working with nonprofits, but then you go into, instead of an advocacy based development, you start to move to a project based development. Can you describe a little bit about the difference between those two worlds?
Right. Oh, I initially, like, almost immediately went into project-based development. And what was interesting was that I didn't realize that this was anything weird within the culture that I was a part of. Because, like, I was not, I was almost 30 when I started doing this work. So it's more than 20 years ago at this point. And I just thought, oh, well, we're all trying to make change right within the same area. So of course people have different roles. And you know what? And I looked around and and just knowing as a kid, hearing and just, whether it was my parents or just my neighbors talking, and especially the ones who were able to move away, they left because what was in their community was not something that nurtured them. So I was like, so we need to be creating something that inspires people to, whether it's to, fight for their own community, because if they feel like it's hopeless, why would they stay? So let's give people something to dream on, or just something else to look at, just to get their attention. And so to me, it was just like, well, okay, nobody else is doing that because there's like a gajillion people focused on advocacy. So, but we need to build something that's going to make people feel like something cool is going on. And and since, the initial work that we started, that I started advocating on was essentially, our city and state wanted to build another huge waste facility on our waterfront. And, my neighborhood's a peninsula, so surrounded on three sides by water. One side, they wanted to build this huge facility on, and the other side, you literally couldn't even get to the water. So, but we were just like, maybe we can do something there. Oh yeah, look at that. You guys are well prepared. But oh yeah, that's after a little seed grant. So we did. And so it's just like, well, maybe we could do something just to show, and like what's 180 degrees from a dump, a park. And, by a beautiful series of circumstances, there was there was like this little $10,000 seed grant to do, restoration work on the Bronx River. And they were very broad. That was very broadly defined. And I defined it, basically as a way to inspire people to think about their waterfront, period, because nobody was, because you literally couldn't get to it. I mean, that place was a dump, as you can see in the top picture. And even after, the work that we did with the little $10,000 seed grant, which basically, provided lunch for people, and things like that, not a whole lot more. But then we were able to leverage that and turn that into essentially a $3 million, restoration. So those were the kind that kind of stuff were those were just some of the activities that we did just to bring people to the water, because people didn't even know there was, access to the only true freshwater river in all of New York City, that it was literally 5 blocks away from their homes. So that was the kind of thing that we wanted to just get people focused on. But again, to leverage it, into what's now a national award-winning park. So that photo was not what it looks like right now at all.
Yes,
But
I think we have
super
the
beautiful
photo
thing. I can't hear you.
We went through all of your old
Oh.
slide decks and found them, but I think we have a picture of the park now, which is
wow, what a crazy picture. I've not seen that one.
Yeah, this one, it's beautiful. And just now we saw everybody standing by that same river, kind of at that same point. So it's really awesome to see.
Yeah.
And I also like, this work is absolutely incredible. And like you said, the project-based work, it's not, I mean, there has to be a satisfaction to actually seeing a visual transformation.
I'm an artist, first and foremost. I think that was also one of the reasons why it was just sort of a natural progression for me. It's just like, oh yeah, people need beautiful things around them. We got to build it, since they're not here right now. And my palette at the time was essentially this crazy little street end that was a dump. Like, okay, that's what I got to work with. And it was an exciting kind of place to be. It really was. And, and to your point about how it feels when you see people enjoying, the fruits of your labor, because I got to tell you, more people enjoy that park than I do. I wish I got a chance to go down there as much as my neighbors do, but that's the point. They're building, because we built another piece of infrastructure, and it is infrastructure that allows a different way of viewing themselves in their own community. It literally inspires people to think about, well, what else can we do here? And that's how you build that kind of stickiness, in a community, so that they become harder around. A beautiful story, and I can't believe I didn't put this in the book. So this was the first waterfront park, our community has had in like 60 years when it was built. And didn't have anything quite like it. And certainly not that beautiful, not that natural, not anything like it. And I remember I was traveling a lot, and I was literally like on my way to the airport to go to California for something or other. And I got this text that the park had been vandalized. At that point, it was 4 years old. And I was just like, oh my God. And then I was I had to get on I was on a 6-hour flight. And then, I had to meet with my clients like right away. And so I didn't get a chance to do anything, because I was thinking, oh my God, who am I going to call to like get this done? And basically I just didn't have the time. By the time I got home, like 2 days later, the park, I mean, it was like every single surface had been, somebody spray painted it, and it was just crazy. And I got back to like news stories about how people in the neighborhood who I'd actually never seen before were so independently mad that somebody would come and mess up their park, that, you know, the flood, you know, of just like calls to the city was just like that. By the time I got home, I didn't even know any, like I could not tell that anything had happened in that park. Like all the graffiti was gone. There was no signs of vandalism because it had all been cleaned up. And I was
That
like,
must have felt so good to be validated that
exactly.
your community finally took full ownership.
It was just like
Yeah.
my name wasn't mentioned. They were just like, I can't believe this happened. And yes, the city with this, no, this will not happen. They could not have been from around here because this is our park. And I was like, ah!
Yeah, you know, you really showed also a kind of a process in time through your text. And one of the ways that you did that, which I had to get a photo because you talked about your dog and your dog being the one who found the waterfront.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I had to have Ryan, I don't know, but I had to have him find a picture of your dog Xena. And also, so you had little Rip, you wrote after Xena had passed away, you actually wrote Rip in your text. And you also did that. You said your father never had the chance to see this place. So anyway, I had to throw that in because these were moments that I just got really like choked up because I'm like, you're doing all of these things and time is passing and things are happening. And since this time, you really have done a lot. I mean, this was the beginning. You were in a TED Talk, but then since that time, there's so much that has happened. And it's really amazing to me. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about some of the other projects.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's my new baby. That is a historic rail station. It was designed by Cass Gilbert, you know, who was like America's first architect. You know, he did the Woolworth Building and the U.S. Supreme Court building, the George Washington Bridge design. I mean, just, you know, he really was like the super famous guy, and he was kind of like a bit of a, you know, a dandy and partied a lot, you know, and all, he was crazy. So, but back in the day, he was designing these little rail stations. And, you know, because the railroads had that much money to throw around, they got this super expensive architect to do it. And so there was one in Hunts Point because they were all over the place. And it was interesting because my dad, you know, who actually this year would have been 100, and he was born in 1907. So we've been pretty old. And he was a Pullman porter, which meant that, you know, he was like one of the first, you know, the black men that worked the trains, you know, as the servants, you know, on the train, because that's how people moved. And it was in the 1940s. And he, you know, because he was a black man in America, there wasn't like, you know, loans that they could get. I mean, it was just talk about access to capital. I mean, it was even worse. He won $15,000 because he played the ponies, or it was a gamble. He was like, daddy was a gambling man. And so he had to take the $15,000 that he won, literally carry $15,000, you know, with him across the country to pay for the house that he wanted by that rail station, because he would learned that they were led to believe that at some point the rails were going to come back. They were going to reactivate service. At that point, it was closed. It never reopened. But that's why I was born in the neighborhood that I'm in right now, that I was born in, because my dad had hoped that that would be a shorter distance for him to go, because that was his rail line. And so we acquired that building just a few years ago, because the owner, it was split into like a little mini storefront. And honestly, when he died, you know, that's when Amtrak, who owned the building, said, you know, he had these ridiculous terms, like so cheap. And so and they were just like, no, everybody's got to go. He's dead, so no, everybody goes. And so basically people left after a while, and it just sat there vacant. This was the gateway of our community. And it just got tagged up in like the really unpleasant ways. And it was not the good kind of graffiti, which I love, but not then. And it just felt like a chilling effect. This was this the abandoned looking building. And at one point I just hollered at Amtrak and just said, I want to acquire it. I had no plans, none whatsoever. But they talked to me and I was like, okay. And we were able to acquire it. And now we're transforming it into an event hall. So it's literally a social space, like the kind of third space that, it's neither work nor home. But again, like the cafe, people kind of fill the cafe with their own visions for what they want to see in their community. So you can have, sweet 16 parties, weddings, bye Carmen. um, and things like my dream is that it becomes a music venue, because we really don't have many, but it's a really cool spot. And last year, and I did have photos. If I knew you were going to do this, I would have sent you some. There was we did a little sneak peek of what it could look like. So we had a pop-up market or a flea market, local vendors during the day. And then there was a film screening that evening, by a Bronx-born actor named Malik Yoba, who's also now a director. And he, did a documentary on real estate, the Black and brown real estate developers in New York City. And I was featured in the first one. And then after that, we had a whole music program with like hip hop and some R&B and rock. It was crazy, and I haven't been awake that long in a really long time because I go to sleep at like 9. And we were there till like 3 in the morning. It was great. It was amazing, but I couldn't believe. And what was so beautiful is that people were just like, I cannot believe that that this is happening in our community. And I both love and hate hearing it, because it's kind of like, these things don't happen in our communities. That's why we need to build more of them. And that's why they need to be. Mm-hmm.
I feel like your text is about turning that around. And one of the things when you talk about brain drain and stopping this, what you essentially called failure retention model in communities, like you also show that when people are pushed to leave, that the community loses so much. And there's a series of different losses that you describe in your text about consumer dollars, about everyday examples of success, people who end up knowing people in their own community who've done things that are amazing, and reinvestment capital. So I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit about why people need to, or in cities need to change this idea.
Yeah, just think of it, our approach to community development. We took a page out of a business book, basically. If you have a company, and you're employing people and you are investing in them, it's whether you're giving them trainings, or you're just like working to keep them happy so that they stay, so that they can continue to give to support the bottom line of your company. You're not expecting them, you're hoping, you're doing these things because you're hoping that they stay with you, because you don't want to train people again, you don't want to do any of those things. But we don't do that in low status communities. We don't. And then we wonder why people are just like, why would I stay here? I don't think they wonder at all why people don't stay there. I think that's the design, because, economically disempowered people are easy to push on. And I really do believe that if you don't see what success can look like, it's so much harder for you to visualize it for yourself. And why it's so much more easier, to internalize like all the kind of things that make you feel like I have no hope. And then of course, then there's always like a program, that, billions of dollars of, not particularly, good programs come in to support the same thing that you're going through. And we also don't see, and we wondered why the wealth gap is so wide. Yes, we have to acknowledge that there's been literally 400 years of systemic racism, which resulted in advantages for white people that people of color, in particular Black people, had no hope of getting, right? So we know that, but if we are led to believe that there's no value in our communities, even when we do have something of value, we shed it, we get rid of it. We'll sooner sell it to the first person that asks. I literally, just a couple hours ago, had somebody call my cell phone and ask me to, they were basically like, I'd love to buy your house for cash. What do you want for it? Because there's an assumption that people in our communities have no idea the value, but they'll play the game like, oh yeah, we want to give you a fair price. And I'm like, that's not the case ever. It's like these predatory speculators are banking on people in our own communities not seeing the value, because we don't see the value in ourselves. There's a whole industry that tells us that there's no value in our communities. And we have never, ever, ever had a shortage of talent being born and raised in our community. What we have is a shortage of talent staying in it. And so that's why this community, this talent retention strategy is so important, because it's, I don't think that it's going to solve, poverty level economic maintenance or gentrification, right? But what I do believe is that if we don't insert talent retention as a community development strategy, if we aren't, instilling a sense of pride and value within the residents of our communities, so that they become the keys to its economic and social and environmental and spiritual, revitalization, then someone else will do it. Because it's always has been about, the lack of wealth creation in our communities that actually stays to support ourselves within our communities.
So you have been a disruptor in your own community, and you have made an effort. You've said to us that seeing is believing, and you've made project-based things happen that show people and help them to see what can be different. And there's things now that you said people don't even recognize any longer that that park took that struggle to get to where it is today.
Right.
And
no idea.
What I want to ask is, along that way, it has been really hard. It sounds like from your text that like you have had a lot of protests. You've been from all different sectors. We're talking folks in the community, people at city councils, people in the real estate industry, from every sector. There has been this just pulling down. And the hardest part for me about all of this is when you do think of the people in your own community, and they see, but then they're putting you as an outsider that wants to harm them. And that piece for me really, and you said it, and I have to read what you said it 3 times at least.
What did I
you said,
say?
when asked what evidence they had of all the alleged transgressions, their response was to hurl a long and not particularly creative string of epithets at me that referenced race, gender, intelligence, and morality, and negated my humanity. You later say a vocal minority not only didn't see, but could barely acknowledge my humanity in the process. And then you also say, despite the assertions of my detractors, I am indeed human. And this idea of dehumanization that goes on and occurs in these moments is heartbreaking. And I think it's the biggest, just in terms of me, like I love Paulo Freire, who wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And there's one of these things where humanization is the real work.
Yes.
Because this kind of sub-oppressive behavior that's going on in those communities that are being shown a liberatory mechanism, but not being able and willing even to see that it's even coming from someone within their own community, is really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the effectiveness of, white supremacy, in this culture, and I think especially since, I'm a Black woman, and we are literally the face of welfare and all that's wrong, in our country. So for me to believe for a second that I was going to avoid that would have been crazy. It just wasn't going to happen. And So, I mean, I do. So look, I mean, I'm not pretending that it doesn't hurt. I mean, some of these people, I actually knew them, and it was just like, I'm literally right here. I live on your block, or maybe you live on mine. I don't like how, whatever you want to call it. So can you just don't even see that. But but what's been fascinating is that, the bottom line is like this really is, this is the work, right? And this work is my ministry. Like the two biggest commands in my faith are like, you love God and you love your neighbor. And that's what I do. It doesn't say you got to like your neighbor all the time. It says you got to love your neighbor. And I do. And because I got a lot of neighbors, and the ones that don't like me, that's okay. It's like, that's really not my problem, because my job is to also to support the ones that are out there. And what's also been beautiful to know is that I have plenty of love, so much, so much. And I mean, I think earlier, and on my path, I did focus a whole lot more, on the why don't they like me? Why are they so hostile? And I realized it has nothing to do with me. Like they have issues with liking themselves or loving themselves. And so my meeting, their kind, that's where the Dr. King, you got to think about that. It's like, hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. So I'm going to keep, showing my love for my community and communities like it all over this world. And, maybe they'll come along and maybe they won't. But yeah, but I know I was fearfully and wonderfully made. So I can't take that personally. I do. I'm just, sometimes I'm just like astonished. I'm like, I'm really cool. Like, this is some cool stuff. Like, really, why would you not want to like hang out with me? But they don't. I'm like, that's more of me for other people.
Thank you so much. I have a question, because I know that we're coming to like close to the end of time, and I know we need more time to be able to talk with you, because there's a lot of placemakers who have a lot of questions. But I wanted to start off. We have a question from Monica Williams and Jim Ross out of Pontiac, Michigan, at Pinco. And they said, your book is a clarion call for how we must address the unprecedented federal investment funding, and how do we ensure that the funding meets the criteria versus the nonprofit industrial complex, who will be sure to have their hands out, and without informed communities, they may be receiving inappropriate funding given the guidelines.
Are you talking about the Justice 40?
No, well, I think that they're talking about any of the federal fundings that are coming in for infrastructure. A lot of placemakers, yes.
Yeah. And so that is, in particular, the Biden's, executive order, around that 40% of that funding is supposed to go to, frontline communities, like the low status communities that I've been talking about. And, you're right, the whole NOFA, federal operating system is really sucky. It is absolutely privileged, the folks that already have the advantage, and not the frontline communities who often don't even know how to participate, in that. And that in and of itself is a major problem. But there are some opportunities, and I can't say that I'm an expert in any of them, at all. But there are, some opportunities that will make it so that it's a lot less difficult for the folks in those communities to be able to access that. But it's not going to be easy. It is absolutely not going to be easy. There are some accelerator, programs that are really trying to help make that happen. The Economic Development, Authority is actually working on a whole bunch of them. So that's actually one of the places that you want to, connect with, to make sure that you can actually see the value in it. But, I think you are absolutely right to be concerned. And I do think that there are, someone wrote, Tiffany Robinson wrote, that there are so many gatekeepers of fun for the communities that assume those activities won't work, so they don't even plan for us. There's also gatekeepers, within. So yeah, so as far as like the fun stuff, but even as far as like access to the kind of real economic, sort of economic life-giving, activities that can be the difference between a community economically, struggling or thriving. Like, that's what that infrastructure money is supposed to take care of. There are gatekeepers out there too. and they need to be taken down. I mean, because I do worry about that, and I worry that come the midterms, we're not going to see another kind of reappropriation, that level of funding in support of those communities. But so the those that are out there, we got to keep pushing.
Is there any other questions, Ryan, or anyone that we have that we can ask before we leave? Or we actually only have about 5 minutes left, and there's so many more things that I would love to talk about and know. I just want you to know, like, I definitely was very moved. I had moments where I was mad at my own parents because I was like, they bought 20 acres of land, and then they are trying, because they're getting older, and they're trying to figure out ways to still have money, and just a lot of things came up for me, and I really appreciate that you've written this book.
Thank you. Thank you. And I do, I mean, Lin-Manuel Miranda, did a blurb for me. And it really is about those conversations. So I do hope you talk with your parents, about what, because yes, they're getting older, like you and your siblings going to take over that land, and what's going to happen, like how are you going to support your families to go forward. There's a whole discussion guide in the back of the book, which is all it is a series of questions y'all can ask each other, which would of course will prompt other questions about your specific situation. And I'm just so I actually have a story that I'd love to tell you. So a woman, so this is after obviously the book has been out, and I met, really lovely woman at a conference, not that long ago, but she was great. And so she got a copy of my book and had literally just, was in that 3-day waiting period before, when either the buyer or the seller, has the right to cancel the sale on our property. And so it was a multifamily property. She had, a couple sets of tenants, and she read my book in one sitting. And literally the first thing she did after she put it down was pick up the phone and, call her broker and cancel the sale, because she's like, this is my child's inheritance. And you know what? I love my tenants. I've been providing what I think is a pretty decent, place, for 2 families that, and I care about them. So, is the next person who's going to buy this building, are they going to care as much as I do? And she actually found my number and called me to tell me this. And I sat, I was standing in my kitchen because it was late, and I was like, who's calling me this late? I don't talk to people after 10 o'clock. But she was so excited that she had to call me. And I remember standing in my kitchen when I picked up the phone and just cried.
Yeah.
Because I was like, that's exactly was what I hope will happen, and many, 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 many times over, for families to look at, their, like, the beautiful opportunities for them to create joy and well-being, for their own families in their own communities.
Thank you so much, Ms. Majora Carter. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And I love that on your book, Reclaiming Your Community, you don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. And it's written in the Smithsonian.
Yes,
the Smithsonian has your quote there. So
yeah,
it's written in stone.
It is. And it's part of the permanent collection at the African American Museum. Yep, sure enough is. I haven't seen it yet.
We want to thank all the placemakers, and we hope that you will come back again to talk more, because I know placemakers have other questions, but we will have to take a whole nother session for it.
I got a question from Frankie, if you want to read it.
Oh, Frankie. Yeah, hi, Frankie from Flint.
I've got a little time, so I can definitely ask this.
Okay, well, we have Frankie McIntosh from Flint, and she's an amazing poet. She said, you mentioned the youth being empowered, pushed to leave their communities. In what ways that community members can change that narrative to make youth feel empowered in their area?
Yeah, well, I don't think youth are being, well, they are being pushed to leave, in part because when this is an example that I do talk about in the book in much more detail, but in short, when we first started doing development, we were doing market research, right? And, which was basically ask folks, what were their hopes and dreams and aspirations, for the kind of communities that they wanted to be in, and also what did the community need now? And the high school students here specifically would say things like, well, the neighborhood needs more homeless shelters and, really low income housing and, more health clinics because people here are sick all the time. And what was notable about those young people is that we were, over the past 5 or 6, maybe 7 years, we've had more kids graduating and going on to college in this community than we've had in the past 30 years. So people were like super excited about that. And so the follow-up question to these kids was, so, you're going to go away to school, are you planning on coming back here? And they would visibly recoil. They would be like, no, why would I come back here? Like, it's awful here. Like, no, like everything that they talked about that the community needed were the exact things that they were like, I don't want it. I don't want no part of that. And what was fascinating is that, what they were hearing from the nonprofit industrial complex was that's all that the community need, even though they were being told that they needed to get out, right? And so creating the kind of third spaces where young people, can see other cool folks, whether sometimes the same age, sometimes older, whatever. And then they also have an opportunity to showcase their own talents. And then they're like, I can do that in my own neighborhood. Okay. And that's how you make people feel empowered. When they feel like they have like an emotional, and personal stake, in their community being cool because it reflects back on them. And they get shine, from being in a place like that. That's how you empower people. But if people don't see any reason for it to feel like it's something good for them, they won't. They just won't. So that's you got to give people reasons to dream about their own communities in good ways.
You have a third space, which is your coffee shop, and you mentioned in your text too that you've met more people in your community through that space than you met before that.
Totally. I mean, and it's just, and it's a relatively small community. There's only about 14,000 people or so, in this general area of residents that are here. And in New York City, that's not that many. So, but still, the fact that we've created this beautiful space, and especially during the pandemic, oh my God, because, we so much of our programming was outside because we had to be. So the music, the artwork, all of that was outdoors. And so we actually were able to accommodate a lot more people because we had a corner. So we had both sides of the street, whereas indoors we could do about 40. But outdoors we could do hundreds of people. And they were all different ages, which was really beautiful. And it was the kind of thing where you just realize there's so many cool people, in your neighborhood, but you didn't have a place to come together and to see each other and to show that kind of beauty. We just didn't have it. So
I love how you mentioned that originally your space, you had some help, but then you totally redid it and took on the hip hop culture.
Yeah.
You changed the name, you revamped the whole space so that it really would be appealing to your community.
Right. I mean, it was appealing at first, but it was just tiny. And it looked more like, the same kind of cute little coffee shop that you'd find, downtown in anywhere. It had reclaimed wood. It had a cute chandelier. Granted, my husband and I made the chandelier. It was really awesome. But it was just a cute specialty coffee shop. And then, because we partnered with a really great coffee roast house. And then after that, we were able to move to a bigger space. And we decided to really like rebrand ourselves in the community culture, which is hip hop. And so we called ourselves the Boogie Down Grind because Boogie Down is, for those of you who don't know, first of all, the South Bronx is the birthplace of hip hop. You are all welcome. And we, so, and the Boogie Down is literally the name for the South Bronx. It's just a little affectionate term that we've been calling it. And, for decades at this point. So we just, took on that name, decorated the place like in all of the, accoutrement of the early hip hop era. And, like album covers, seminal album covers of the early hip hop days, even, we would find signage, of the early days and like post it up on literally the actual physical signage, which is really kind of fun and cool. And yeah, so we've just been it's just been beautiful. People will bring us like, artifacts of that era, and so we can keep it and just like, and we hang them up on the wall. It is absolutely beautiful, like, and people really feel like it's both, it's like a living museum because the history is still there. It's still ours. It's really nice.
And from that community commons, I noticed that you also talk about all these other people and organizations, like the bookstore that was opened by, you said, Noel Santos, the children author. You began to see all of these people that were doing amazing things in your own community.
Yes. And but again, community, it's not just a place, right? It's an activity. But if you don't have a place to do community, you're going to miss out. So that's why it's so important to have these third spaces so that you can, because it's not work, it's not home, and it gives people an opportunity to just be. And that's why they're so important. But
Well,
you all know that.
thank you again.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. And you guys are amazing. Thank you for doing what you do. Thanks, Madeleine.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much, you guys. I'm Ryan Smoller from PlacemakingUS, and thanks to Madeleine for hosting this amazing talk, and Majora for writing your great book and all the good work you're doing and talking here with all of us. I also want to thank PlacemakingX, who sponsored this by buying 10 books, and we've been actually visiting Jacksonville, Florida right now, which embodies a lot of the issues you guys have been talking about. And we've been handing your book out to neighborhood leaders who are helping reclaim their communities from racism, urban renewal, Federal Highway Act, and redlining, and they just melt when they see the cover. So I'm really excited to dig into it myself and to hand out the remaining books to the rest of you who chimed in. And I hope this is the first of many conversations, because it was very helpful for people who are fighting these similar battles across the country.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.